Up until now, Hume has explained the way that we draw causal inferences from present sense experiences. We often find objects or situations to be constantly conjoined. These we come to regard as being necessarily connected. Now we know that all our ideas we derive originally from impressions. So there must be some sort of impression that leads us to have the idea of necessary connection. Consider we strike a match and it lights. We see that the flame came immediately after we struck the match, and the flame was hovering right above that very match we lit. Also, the match was unvolatile, sitting in its box. Had we not scraped the match head, it would not have blazed. So, when we examine just one pair of causally connected objects, we discover only two relations between them. They are contiguous in time and place, and the cause preceded the effect. We find no other relations between them when we just examine one pair. Now our candle wick is quite short, so we do not light it on the first strike. In fact, we run through the dozens of matches in the box before finally the last one lights our candle. Each of the dozens of matches we lit are repetitions of the same causal pairing. So let's see if we may determine any more relations between necessarily connected objects when we examine more than one instance of their pairing. We find that for every strike there is a flame. Each strike is like the others, and each flame is like the rest. So like causes produce like effects. One instance of a certain experience can produce a new idea. However, if we repeat that same experience, we cannot thereby obtain a new idea. For any idea we obtain will be no different than in the first instance. So the similarity between repetitions does not account for our idea of their necessary connections. Yet, we cannot say that each repetition is absolutely the same. One time when we strike, we hold the match at one angle, the next time at a very slightly different one. Or even if the angle is the same, sounds in the background are detectably different. So no matter what, some detail will indicate that one instance is somehow different from the rest. Nonetheless, we still associatively group them together, but it is only because one repetition is at least minimally different that it can be considered an addition to the group. Otherwise, we would not be able to discern it as a separate but similar experience that might be associatively assimilated with the rest. And it is by means of this assimilation of slightly different ideas that we obtain the additional idea of necessity. Our questions regarding causation are the most important questions in philosophy, and in both ancient and modern times, philosophers have debated the quality of causes that makes their effects follow. We may also call this quality efficacy, but Hume thinks that this should first have analyzed our idea for this efficacy, which he will do now. Hume will look to our impressions which brought about the idea of efficacy. If efficacy is a compound idea, then it results from compound impressions, but if it is a simple idea, then it arises from simple impressions. Locke's theory of power is the most general and popular account. Consider that we strike the match, then a flame results. We see such changes in the world around us, but we do not know how something can come from nothing. There must be some efficient cause that has the potency to produce these new things. So we rationally deduce that there is efficacy or power. Hume refutes this. We must recall two principles that we already have established. We cannot arrive at any original idea by means of reason alone, and without experience's aid, reason can never conclude that a cause is necessary to begin an existence. So we see that reason cannot by itself produce the idea of efficacy. We must instead derive it from experiences. These instances would exhibit efficacy, which then would impress upon our senses. This impression would in turn impress the idea of efficacy in our minds. We believe that we know the idea of efficacy, so there must be some experience that exhibits it in this way. But perhaps we never find such an experience, which would suggest that in fact we do not have such an idea of efficacy. For Hume has already refuted the principle of a priori or innate ideas. Hume concludes that there is no such efficient cause to be found among an object's properties. If he did believe there was such an efficacy, then he would only need to demonstrate it by means of experimentation. But he believes instead a negative conclusion that this efficacy does not exist. So his only means to prove it is to challenge anyone to show him the experience in which we directly perceive it. If no one can do so, then he has defended his argument as best as he possibly can. So we experience several instances of constantly conjoined objects. None of the instances has any influence on the others, nor do any produce new qualities in the others which might provide the model for the idea of causal necessity. But somehow the resemblances between repetitions do give us such an idea. For after many cases, our minds move from cause to effect automatically as though they were necessarily connected. Because these resembling instances repeat so much, we are led to conceive the notion of a causal power or necessity governing their conjunction. We experience continual repetition of resembling conjunctions. And after a while, our mind performs an automatic motion. It moves from the sensation of the cause to the conception of the effect, even if the effect is not present to the senses. This very movement itself produces an internal impression in our mind, and this impression is the idea of causal necessity. We know that all ideas arise from impressions, but there is no impression from external objects that can give rise to the idea of necessity. Hence, we must obtain this idea from an internal impression or an impression of a reflection. There is only one such internal impression that could possibly produce the idea of necessity, the impression that is made by our minds customarily moving from an object to its usually attendant idea. Now, we will now give a formal definition for cause and effect, and our definitions for causation may not satisfy those who want to reason beyond what experience tells us. Hume says that there are two possible definitions for the causal relation. Definition 1 is that a cause is an object. It precedes a contiguous object. All objects resembling the cause are likewise considered to precede contiguous objects that resemble the effect. This definition might be criticized for defining a cause by something external to it. So we might consider the alternative, which is the second definition, that a cause is an object, it precedes a contiguous object, the cause is united with its effect. So when our mind conceives the idea of the one, it thereby conceives the other. And when we have a sense impression of the cause, we obtain a more lively idea of the effect. But someone might still say that we are defining cause by something external to it, namely by the effect that accompanies it. Hume says that he can give no better definition, and if one is desired, we have to produce it ourselves.